Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, niha, buenos dias, buenas tardes, heseche, akwaba, bakumin, waroko. This is Cafe Melange, week numero 28, I think, bongo. So a wee bit delayed this afternoon, but that's okay because on occasion that's the nature of things. So the topic for this joint today is basically melange economics. I'm gonna get into it. I've some other notes, but some other considerations, but I'm just gonna get into this because it helps with the concentration and getting it out. So just get into it. And a lot of this I've shared in previous iterations, in previous weeks, even in recent weeks. However, it seems beneficial to like focus specifically and in further detail on this practice, this concept, the ideas, the principles that guide this, um, and uh, and actually the efficacy that I experience at this moment, by the grace of God, thankfully. So, anyways, here it is. Uh, First, we talk about melange, wisdom and righteousness, and so I mentioned before that those are the ultimate determinants of the value, the quality of an individual's walk in this life, wisdom and righteousness. And that's considered across the board amongst all the different traditions of the earth, one way or another. Um, so, to kind of be further specific about what that wisdom and righteousness is, first, there's subcategories of that. So, within the wisdom, we talk about, as Confucius teaches, songs, stories, and rituals. Um, Socrates shares that as well, and effectively. Um, so that's the wisdom part of it. A knowledge about our songs, knowledge about our stories, and knowledge about our rituals. The way things are passed down from generation to generation, how we learn the shibboleth of our civilization. Then the righteous part of it is the ethical discipline, the principles that we practice on a regular basis, on day to day. So that is the righteous part of it, putting that wisdom into practice, and flexing it that way. So that's what we're talking about as the general scope or pretext, context. Um, Subtext is somewhat of a different connotation, but foundation. How about that? And all that can sound nice on paper. It can sound nice recorded when people give talks and things like that about what we should be doing. But then the test, the true grit is how we actually live from that. How the way we sustain ourselves is actually abides by those principles, because there are a lot of people that talk about righteousness and what it is to be virtuous and this and the other and all these principles, but then it's like, well, yeah, but it's very tough to do actually. So you go to the store, and a lot of the things that are provided at the store ain't provided through those methodologies, ain't provided through the adherence to those virtues and principles. And so we have very pragmatic decisions to make on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis of like, okay, am I going to like feed myself because I need to feed myself from these products or whatever that are not necessarily the most ethically provided, or am I going to like forego that? Am I going to find another option that is increasingly ethical, or can I do a co-op in addition? So, anyways, it's abiding by the principles. It's a very simple concept, drawn out. So that's where we get into the melange ethic, or excuse me, the melange economics of right, of how these principles, the wisdom and righteousness, it is actually how we sustain ourselves actually from this. And I've given my own personal testimonies about things I've done, and to with certain degrees of efficacy, varying degrees of efficacy, with varying degrees of legitness. Meaning, like that wasn't necessary, or that's not, I wouldn't recommend that for others. So, and then I would recommend other things for others. So, anyways, amidst all that, it's a process of learning, of studying, finding out what's effective, what works, what's practical, and uh, in doing that, um, this is a system that is gleaned from that walk, from that experience, from that study, from that learning, through that diligence. Um, so in this economic system or economic, it's not even necessarily a system, it's just like a paradigm, perhaps, whatever. Um, these are the components of it. But basically, uh, two basic components to the economic system. It's an ethics-based economic system, and by that is meant that basically two categories in the aggregate society are those who take a vow to adhere to a certain ethics. In this specific case, it's the fivefold ethical discipline that I described before of honesty, sobriety, veganism, marital fidelity, and ethical economics. Um, and we can talk about the details of what all that is additionally, but it's at least the very notion, the very minimum acknowledgement of those principles and adherence to those principles as a legit thing. So, anyways, that's the vow. And so the two categories are those who uh, make the vow and pledge to live a lifestyle according to that discipline, ethical discipline, and then those of the general community. And there's not a higher, there's not like a, I have to say, I do put hierarchy down here, but it's not a better than type of situation because anybody can do that. So it's not a matter of like saying anybody's intrinsically better than anybody else. It's a matter of recognizing that there's benefit that is gleaned, that the individual gleans, that society gleans when people live by this way. And so anybody can do it. And it's accessible to anybody. Um, and it benefits the aggregate of society. And thus, those who do make the vow, um, it behooves the aggregate of society to support individuals accordingly because it does benefit the aggregate of society. And so that's basically the two main categories. So with that, then we go into like the subcategories or in the further details. So um, in the vow makers category, there are basically two types of vow makers. There are those that make the limited vow, and then there are those who make a stricter vow. So the limited vow is basically just what I just mentioned: the fivefold ethics, the simplefold ethics, and a very like basic adherence to each of those, whilst still being able to be a householder, to be married, have children, live a householder life. That's the limited vow. And so then the other category is the strict vow. Um, I intend to go into what I to previously describe on previous iteration of the Jain tradition, and this is where this comes from, coming from. But the great vow or the strict vow are those individuals who make a further vow, like a further stringent vow, a further restrictive vow, a further austere vow that can include celibacy, can include renunciation, an increasingly severe vow um, that can preclude being a householder. So there are different implications that are associated with that type of greater vow, and there are actually a number of different types of greater vows. There are varying types of strict vows that can be made. So I intend to get into that a little bit later in this joint as well. But those are basic two categories of vow making, and uh, so there's that. In the general community, um, there is also another hierarchy. Nobody's better than anybody else. It's just a matter of recognizing the benefits that are gleaned from the type of behavior that people uh, practice. So these are, we can call it degrees of behavior or the hierarchy of behavior or actions or contributions. That's actually probably further appropriate. this is the hierarchy of contributions that the general community provides to the general community, and specifically the vow makers, for the interest of the well-being of the entirety of the community. So the first level is contributions, like just like a one-off kind of contribution, a charitable contribution, quote unquote charitable. Um, but just here, I'm gonna give you this. Cool, that's it. A one-time offering. That's the first degree category of contribution. The second degree category of contribution is tithing. So tithing is when one gives a percentage of their income, a monthly income or a yearly income, but it's a regular contribution. So there's a certain amount of um, reliability that can be built from that type of giving. It's an intentionality, it's a mindfulness that just recognizes the benefit of that the vow makers provide for the rest of society. So and the principles and additioning. So it's just a support of that, and so that's tithing. Then the third category of contribution is philanthropy. So philanthropy are those large investments or large contributions that go towards the construction of like a residential space or a community center or a healing place. But something that's other than distinct from a charitable contribution, that's just kind of like here's what I have to provide. But it's actual completion of a project that contributes to the well-being of the community, like in a very tangible, systemic way. So that's like I said, the third degree of giving, or third degree of contribution. And then the fourth degree of contribution is study, learning, learning what the principles are, learning what the wisdom is, learning what the righteousness is, and just like study. So that's the fourth, the highest degree of contribution to the society. Um, and for the most part, each of those, well, I shouldn't say, three of those anybody can provide. A charitable contribution, a tithe, study, all that. It doesn't matter what a person's income is. If a person can give a contribution at some point, even if it's volunteering or whatever. Tithing, if somebody's making $1 in the past year, they can give 10 cents of that dollar. That's tithing right there. And then the fourth category, study. Anybody can study one way. You get illiterate, mute, deaf. Additionally, you can still study. So third degree of philanthropy, obviously everybody can't everybody's not necessarily equipped to like provide a building or whatever, but it's not the greatest degree of giving or contribution on this hierarchy. So and again, ain't no better than others or whatever else. It's just a matter of recognizing the benefit that's shared with the community. So I gotta keep track of a little bit of time on this chart. All right. So that's the general community and the different categories within the community. So now we get into some further details. Within amongst the vow makers, there are some fundamental differences between the limited vow makers and the strict vow makers. So, like I said before, the limited vow makers can be householders, can live a regular householder life, be married, have family, have jobs, get in, have economic exchange, and have income working with the general community. I should probably say this also. Um, so the general community is the entirety of Earth within our melange experience. So, and the vow makers, anybody from Earth can be a vow maker and practice the vow. So it's not a matter of blood quantum or whatever. There's a consideration that melange is a distinct experience of mixed heritage. But as I continually, repeatedly, consistently communicate, there are no boundaries in melange, even amongst monoethnic and additionally, because that's the nature of it. And so it's the entirety of Earth. There are obviously differences. There are lines. There's a difference between a line and a boundary. And so there are distinctions, but there's no border. And because of that, when we identify like the community, we can identify of community of people who identify as mixed heritage, but that's the totality of melange. The totality of melange is the totality of all humans and humanoids for the purposes of this convo at the moment. Um, it includes always all humans, but the humanoids is somewhat of a further consideration. So that's why I say that. So the general community is the entirety of Earth, and the vow makers are anybody from the general community who make the vow. That's it. Um, so when it comes to the details about what the vow makers can do and cannot do, like I said, the limited vow makers can have ordinary householder lives and have jobs and work and contract and get income from the general community in addition. Uh, and the limited vow makers, the same category of group, um, also administer the contributions that are provided to the community through those auspices. So that's one of the responsibilities of the limited vow making group, is to administer those contributions. Um, Also, the limited vow makers automatically tied a minimum of 10% of income. Right? So that's a part of the protocols in terms of the ethical economics of taking the vow of um, the limited vow. So that's those are some of the characteristics of um, the limited vow makers. Now, when it comes to the strict vow makers, like I said, there are a number of different types. Like I said, there are sects, sects, that can be renunciants and take a vow of poverty or take a vow of modesty, meaning only being able to live a certain degree of socioeconomic comfort. Can take a vow of celibacy. So there are all different types of further extra kind of extra stringent vows that people can make. But each one has the basic minimum of the five uh, ethical disciplines that I mentioned. Um, so one of the additional requirements or uh, guidelines for all types of strict vow makers is that in making the strict vow, regardless of uh, what the income kind of protocol is, the strict vow makers can only live from the contributions that are administered by the limited vow makers. So the strict vow makers are precluded, are prohibited, are not allowed to glean income or contributions from the general community. There's a little bit of a buffer there. And so there are a number of reasons for that, and I might get into that in another section of this talk, of this outline. So, but that's one a significant factor in this paradigm. Uh, so those are most of the details. In terms of details for the general community, um, I think the um, the levels of contribution speak for itself, and it's according to each one's own volition, and each level of category has its own benefits, and uh, that are gleaned from that as well. So there's that. With all that communicated, what I will share at this point is some of the background, like where does all this come from? Uh, these ain't my ideas. I'm not creating this. This is gleaned from studies and practice and all that. So what I plan to do is like go through a list of traditions that give some type of contribute in some way to this melange economic paradigm. Uh, because it is gleaned from a number of different traditions. So it's in some ways is distinct from each one because it's composed of all of them in one way or another. But it's very similar, very strongly similar, and and congruent with um, many and arguably each one. So here we go with the list of traditions. So first we go with Israeli tradition, and I shared some of this before, but um, it bears repeating. Um, So in the tradition of Israel, there is the 12 tribes, and then there are the sons of Levi, which is one of the tribes. Uh, but the sons of Levi are designated as the Kohan, or the priestly uh, caste amongst all the 12 tribes. And so, as being the priestly caste, the Levi have certain responsibilities for conducting the rituals, officiating uh, the offerings, and doing additional ceremonies, religious ceremonies within the community. Uh, and that's distinct from all the other tribes amongst the 12 of Israel, the Dose. And there are also with those responsibilities and duties, there are also certain restrictions. The Levi are precluded from having an ancestral or um, uh, hereditary lands amongst Eretz Israel. So amongst all the 12 tribes, each tribe initially and by Torah injunction, each tribe is a portion, a segment of land, a plot of land, and each member of the tribe is given a portion of that portion based on the tribal affiliation. So that applies to all the different tribes except for the Levim, who are precluded from having that because they are the Levim are distinct, and so instead the Levim, the sons of Levi are provided with designated areas in each of the different places, but where the other 11 tribes are given the land to work the land because it's an agrarian society predominantly, and so the land is designated as an economic generator, growing crops. So rather than having it for that purpose specifically, the Levim are provided with plots of land for multiple purposes, for multi-use purposes. Um, and Assalamu alaikum. Um, and so the that's the distinction between the Levim and the rest of uh, the 12 tribes. Now, amongst the Levim, there's a further distinction between the regular sons of Levi and then the sons of Aaron, who are the Kohanim, the priestly caste amongst the priestly tribe. And so there are further duties and further designations accordingly. So, anyways, these priestly designations amongst the Levim and the Kohanim also have economic implications, as I mentioned before, in terms of land stewardship, as well as occupations. And so, anyways, that paradigm, that guidance, feeds into this paradigm of melange economics and the distinctions accordingly. So there's that. Now that said, um, uh, another paradigm is Jain, comes from Jain tradition. And so, to be honest, my familiarity with the Jain tradition is comparatively modest compared to that with the tradition of Israel. But what I can provide is the basic concept of the Mahavrata and the Anivrata, or the Mahavratas and the Anivratas, which is the great vow and the limited vow. So, as I mentioned, well, I referred to this before, but in the Jain community, in the Sangha, in the whole of the community, people can have the propensity, each an individual has the propensity of taking a vow. And the principles are the same for everybody. and the vow is available for each individual to make. Uh, and in taking the vow, then the individual becomes recognized and uh, authoritative accordingly. And so there's the limited vow, which is, as I described for the Melange economics and the Melange paradigm, um, is a basic set of principles and certain guidelines of living about by adhering to that discipline. And then the great vow is like those same principles but taken to another level, increasingly strict and limiting. So increasingly strict and austere. So uh, with additional implications in terms of authority and additionally. So um, that obviously is evident within the paradigm for the Melange economic uh, for knowledge economics that I described, because um, distinct from the paradigm of the tradition of Israel, where it is hereditary, the identification of being a Levim or a Kohanim is based upon a Levi or a Kohen, is based upon birthright. Is one is born into that family, and it is descended through the patriarchy. Uh, in the Jain tradition, it is conferred through an individual's own personal volition of adhering to that principle or adhering to that vow. So that's a fundamental distinction within the Melange economics paradigm, because it is there's that distinction that can be found within the Israeli tradition between those who take the vow, between the practitioners and the general community, but then it's also determined by individual volition. So that's coming from the Jain tradition. So that's much of what shapes this Melange economic paradigm. But I'm going to share some additional components as well that are significant and influence this paradigm. So the next tradition we look at is Buddhism, the Buddha. So and I'm going to include, well, it's appropriate to also include or consider the Hindu tradition as well, because the economic model or the economic paradigm that the Buddha shares effectively through his example is actually uh, consonant with uh, the tradition of Hinduism, particularly at that time and even continuing through today. And basically, it's where there's a pre-existing caste system, and in that caste system, there are distinctions of labor. There's the priestly caste. There's the which are the Brahmins. There's the kingly or the princely caste, which is the Kshatriya. There's the service merchant class, which is the Vaishyas, and then there's like the working class. There's the working class of the Shudras, right? Which are the ones who do the labor and work in the field. And then there's the Dalits, which are the untouchables, but that's not much mentioned in the conventional talk about the occupational distinctions. But it actually is extremely important, because the Dalits do what people don't want to do, the quote unquote dirty work, which is exactly just as holy. But anyways, that's another conversation. Um, so in the four categories, um, anyways, all right. So in that caste system, the four varnas, in the varna system of Hinduism, people have another option, which is to opt out instead of pursuing a householder life and being married and having family and raising children in the same caste system that one is born into, because it's hereditary. One can opt out and be a renunciate, become a celibate, become a spiritual aspirant, leave one's family, leave one's community, and just be a spiritual seeker that lives from the contributions that the community makes, the beggar's bowl, um, via the beggar's bowl. So that's what the Buddha does. He's born into the princely caste as a Kshatriya, part of the Siddhartha Gautama is part of the name of his family escapes me at the moment. Well, anyways, um, so that's his lot when it is born into, and but he makes the decision to leave that and become a renunciant because he wants to like experience spiritual transcendence and awakening. So that's what he does, and he becomes a beggar. He becomes a spiritual aspirant that lives from the contributions of others. That's the economics that he practices, and so and it may be difficult for many people to like, I think, effectively perceive that, or at least many people in the West to understand that, because there's a very extremely derogatory connotation and perception towards the beggar within Western society, a loser, a throwaway, garbage, literally. But in India, particularly during the period of the Buddha, it may not necessarily be an ideal situation, but there's at least a system of recognition of like, okay, he's doing this, we can support that person doing that. And so the connotation of contribution additionally is different. And there were almshouses and deer parks and things like that that are set up for people to live that lifestyle. So and travel from village to village, and be have some place to go to whilst practicing that lifestyle. So that's what the Buddha does, and that's part of the economics that the Buddha effectively teaches, because it's the economics that is pre-established amongst within the Hindu tradition. Um, so. Um, Much of that is generally applicable to this Melange economic paradigm, but there's one component that's very specifically evident, which is the four direction, or the four categories, the quattro categories within the general community. Those actually come specifically from a teaching from the Buddha in the Kuttadanta Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, within the Pali Canon of Buddhism, which is specifically Theravada Buddhism, where the Buddha talks about the degrees of contributions that people can offer. And somebody's asking him, what can a person give to like get experience some kind of spiritual benefit? And so the Buddha says, basically, here are four categories of giving. These aren't the optimal things, but this is something people can do. He says, um, again, the one-time kind of offering. Then the next one being uh, the regular alms, like tithing. The next one he says is the building of almshouses, and facilities for the wanderer, which is translated in contemporary parlance as philanthropy. And then the fourth category is studying with one who's doing it. So those four categories come directly from the Buddha. The Buddha goes on to talk about how after that, then it's a matter of actually practicing, and that's where like the vow comes in additionally. So um, obviously that plays a significant factor into this construct of the Melange economic paradigm. I'm going much longer than I was thinking about with this joint, but it seems to be relevant. So we talked about Israel, we talked about Jain, we talked about Buddha, we talked about Hindu. Now we're going into Christianity. So within Christianity, um, again, Jesus actually lives a lifestyle and an economic system that's very similar to the Buddha. He's effectively walks the earth and lives from the contribution of his followers. Now, the circumstances, the conditions are very different in Israel during the time of Jesus than they are for Siddhartha Gautama as the Buddha within India. Jesus is in the land of Israel is actually occupied by another empire, and so the economics are a little bit further dicier. However, during his period, um, but he does give specific direction in terms to his apostles about how to live. He says um, uh, to carry no money. Don't worry about like amassing treasures. He tells people give up everything you have, sell everything you have, give those proceeds to the poor, and then walk this earth and live off the contributions of those who are willing to receive you. And if a village, if a house isn't willing to receive you, shake it off. And they got to deal with the consequences accordingly. If the village doesn't receive you, shake it off. They got to deal with the consequences accordingly. Continue on to somebody that does receive you. So that's basically the guidance that Jesus provides. That's the guidance that he lives. Now we also know that Jesus also is received and he's supported. um, and he crashes at people's cribs, and lives from receives food from the contributions that he did. People provide food. He provides his own food on occasion. I'm referring to what are known as miracles that he provides in terms of like having 2 loaves of bread and feeding thousands of people from those 2 loaves. That's a little bit of a different conversation, though, for the purposes of today. Um, it's relevant though. Um, so, anyways, what are like tangible, pragmatic takeaways, concise takeaways from the teaching that Jesus provides? I think the most applicable one for the purposes of this convo and military economic paradigm is tithing. And I didn't mention that within the tradition of Israel, tithing is actually prescribed amongst all tribes. Each tribe obligated to provide a portion of the uh, the income, um, and there are different percentages. So I'm going to abstain from getting to like all the specific percentages, and there's specific categories of tithing as well. So rather than getting onto that, because I didn't write the notes for that. I don't want to fudge the numbers, whatever. I just say that the tithing is the thing. 10% is a standard number that's applied, and that's what Jesus prescribes as well. And that's traditionally what exists within Christianity through the centuries. Again, um, the actual number might vary, and there are other forms of contributions and giving, but tithing is one of the significant economic generators within the Christian community that sustains the Catholic Church, Protestant churches, and additionally. So that and you can see that evident within the Melange economic paradigm as well. Within Islam, uh, well, I guess the appropriate thing to do is just on that topic of tithing within Islam, there is zakat. There is the giving of one's proceeds to the community for the benefit of those that need it within the community. And so, again, the percentages vary. Um, uh, and so, I just referenced that principle. It's one of the pillars of Islam. Um, so it has that type of significance within the practice of Islam. Um, and there are those who are designated as the official administrators of those proceeds, of those funds, contributions, and how to distribute that within the community. Um, and so I will also share the notion of the imam within Islam, and how the imam is other than a hereditary position, and it's other than an official ordained type of position effectively. The imam is an individual who's simply recognized as the one in a community, in a local community, that has the, uh, the greatest knowledge of the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Salah alaihi Allahu wa salam. May peace and blessings be upon him. And so uh, that principle of recognizing the merits of an individual, regardless of the background that the individual comes from, is also evident within this Melange economic system in terms of recognizing the benefit of the principles, the ethics, um, and the intrinsic authority that is gleaned through adhering to those principles. So even when one doesn't practice the principles oneself in the community, there's still recognition of that. And there's varying degrees of recognition within the general community, because obviously the whole earth is a huge place and people got their own things. And um, but that is a factor within this paradigm. So now I'm going to kind of like breeze through a number of additional traditions, because the details are increasingly kind of conceptual rather than tangible. So with Taoism, in my studies of Tao, it's very modest, but there's an absence of specific constructs or guidance when it comes to economic system. It's a matter of understanding the harmony of things, and understanding uh, one's own nature amidst the aggregate surrounding nature, and through that experiencing the harmony accordingly. And so when we apply that kind of approach towards economics, we can also look at additional teachings of Lao Tzu, which talks about humility, finding the lowest place, like water, shui, and humble, humble, humble. And so there's the guidance of applying that within our economics. And so this Melange economic system, right? This Melange economic paradigm is a systemic construct of that humility. It is um, a delineated, uh, itemized, or uh, further specific methodology, um, and organizing methodology for that humility, and finding the harmony, strengthening the harmony. So I'll leave it at that. In the Baha'i community, I think one of the significant considerations in terms of Baha'i economics to include within this convo at the moment is within the Baha'i community. Baha'i members, first of all, the leadership, the hierarchy. Um, there's the leaders are democratically elected. There's local voting for local leaders, and there's voting for uh, um, additional larger spiritual assemblies, national and the Universal House of Justice. Um, and so that's just the general approach towards authority, how authority is determined, because there's an absence of official, like, ordained religious leaders or clergy within the Baha'i faith. Um, so there's a very intrinsic, very strong ethos of egalitarianism within Baha'i tradition when it comes to community political decision making. And then when it comes to economics, um, pretty much every house, every the policy is people are householders. People live as families, have and raise children, and so as part of that, people have jobs and work with, like, the general community, whether the general, regardless of the general community being Baha'i or otherwise, and so just jobs like everybody else, and making contributions. The thing about it, though, is that when the contributions are made to the Baha'i community, only Baha'i members are able to make contributions, monetary. Other contributions like um, uh, volunteer or other types of services can be provided, but in terms of monetary contributions, only the Baha'i community can make contributions to Baha'i causes, to a Baha'i project or Baha'i funds. And so that's an important distinction, and that can be found in other paradigms that I mentioned, particularly amongst Israel, in addition in terms of some of those type of restrictions about who can do what. But that actually can be seen in this Melange economics paradigm, whereby um, the um, the strict vow makers are precluded from receiving contributions directly from the general community. And part of the purpose of that is maintaining a certain amount of integrity um, within the uh, practice of the strict vow makers. So that's something that can be found evident from the Baha'i approach and methodology. Um, Sikhi, we can talk about Khalsa and the distinction of Khalsa from the aggregate Sikh community. Um, a lot of the same principles of contributions, egalitarianism, and uh, seva are inform um, the methodology that I described with Melange economic paradigm. Um, but again, to be honest, my knowledge about Sikhi methodologies is comparatively modest, so I hesitate in providing any inaccurate, detailed information. So I simply reference it accordingly. Amongst native tradition, um, there are a few considerations. One, again, knowledge is modest, but also there's so a lot of different ways of doing things in Native community. And then there's things like that are traditionally done, how things are traditionally done, but then there's ways things are like contemporarily done, how things are done today, and not necessarily because it's like favorable or tradition, but it's because that's what's available. And it's also a consequence of settler influence and policies and manipulation. So when we talk about native traditional ways, traditional economics, I think some of the important concepts to consider and that are included within this, at least at the very least, intrinsically and inherently. One is the recognition that all this materiality exists beyond anybody's control, beyond anybody's possession, or beyond anybody's notion of property. And this is that same teaching is can be found in additional traditions that I've already referenced. But it's a matter of recognizing that all of this serves a purpose of sharing and being in harmony, being in relationship, um, and improving the well-being of those in the community um, through that sharing, through that relationship. Um, so that's a consideration from native tradition. And so then, as a kind of like top off of this, I'll reference Africa and Europe because when we talk about religious traditions in humanity and on the earth, there tends to be like um, a median type of concentration, meaning that the polarities, the geographic polarities of humanity, north and south, tend to be avoided or under included within the conversation because much of the religiosity that humanity practices and experiences these days initially emanates or emerges from the middle path or the middle part of human geography. So, anyways, it's still very relevant to talk about African and European um, experience as well and tradition. So, again, knowledge modest, but what I will share is this: we can look at contemporary practices and glean the traditional heritage and legacy and discipline that is evident and that continues, that is strengthened by these contemporary practices. So when we talk about Europe, we can go to Scandinavia and look at socialism and the notion of sharing. And what's interesting is that as many people, many capitalists, Eurocentric capitalists, uh, categorically shun and vilify and demonize the notions of communism and even socialism, that type of vilifying seems to be not applied towards the Scandinavian model. And so it speaks of some type of ethnic-based xenophobia rather than necessarily a conceptual uh, disgruntledness, if that makes sense. But all that being said, if you're filming, you're filming. Um, in Scandinavia, there is a strong practice of um, socialism. Um, However, you want to classify what type of socialism it is or whatever, but looking out for each other. Now, there's a very strong experience of homogeneity that can be identified as a precipitator or as a um, impetus for that type of solidarity, yet it is there, and it exists in a conventional way, in an effective way, and even in a leading way that other nations admire. So it ain't perfect or whatever else, but it's just an example of the principles. Um, I go to the one that I go to often. It's just Huga, but just the principles of a collective Huga as a society. Um, the principles of togetherness and supporting each other. That is evident from the Scandinavian and European heritage and tradition and practice. So there's that. Then we go to the flip side of the globe. We go to Africa. We go to Zululand. The same principle practiced by different brethren, which is Ubuntu. I am because you are. It is a Zulu word, but it resonates across the continent. I talk to brethren from a number of different places, from east to west and South Africa, and I say Ubuntu. They know what it is. Seriously. So There's just the notion of like, yo, we in this together. So we gotta look out for each other. And we don't even gotta put it into words. It's just it is what it is. So that's an ancient principle that's practiced to this day systemically in organized ways on CPT and additionally. So there it is. And that factors both of this, the Huga, the Ubuntu, that factors into this Melange economic paradigm. And it's been an hour at this point, thereabouts. I haven't clocked it, but it's about that way. So we're gonna keep it at that. I said I had some other joints to share. I'm gonna leave it at this because you have other things to do. I gotta stop making that excuse, but or explaining that excuse. It's legit to stop it without any reason or explanation. So, yeah. All right. I said I had some other things to share, but that may be for another day. I would say that I have considered, actually, and my initial intention for this joint today was getting into the Haudenosaunee and the Guyana Shagoa, the law of the great peace. And I might have mentioned that on a previous occasion. It's difficult for me to recall specifically, but obviously didn't do it today. And there's a certain, yeah, that's fine. I haven't done it today. Maybe doing it next week, but I'm hesitant in like forecasting the next week's theme at this moment. One of the reasons specifically because there is a particular interest in doing the Haudenosaunee and the Guyana Shagoa. But one, I have to read up on that to be able to be to flow comfortably with that. And then also in sharing it, it's very appropriate to share the story of Diganowida and Hiawatha as a preliminary consideration for the actual law itself. Because the story of it, how it comes to be and how it's shared, is extremely important in understanding like the vibe and everything else that's shared in the law itself. And they are two distinct things. I mean, the story is a story. It's just like I'm gonna try to think of a shared frame of reference that's applicable to this. Um, I mean, I just keep thinking of like the American Revolution, but I don't want to do. I want to share that one as an example. Um, it's like telling about the Underground Railroad, like the different episodes, Harriet Tubman, and additionally, um, that's the story of Diganowida and Hiawatha. So it's a legit story. It's a fascinating, awesome story. Now, that being said, that's what it is. It's the story part of it, but then there's also the law of it, and the law is like the U.S. Constitution, and actually the U.S. Constitution comes from this law. So and it's this distinct set of statutes that just say this is what we're going to do, and it's other than a story per se, it's the actual law, and so it's a different kind of mindset of studying. So I like I said, the consideration is sharing both the story and then sharing the law, but in the story itself, a decent telling of it is going to be like half an hour. And then that's already a decent size. And then to get into the law, there's over 100 statutes or whatever in the law. And obviously it's difficult to get into all of them, but even just going through the basics of it, that's probably another half an hour to an hour. So right there, that's maybe like 2 segments, and that might be what's appropriate, but that also kind of detracts from the effect of sharing the story and then sharing the law. So I'm still looking at the mechanics, and then, like I said before, I have to like read up on it so that I can like be further succinct and additionally uh, in these original synthesizations. All right. What I will also say as I write this up, join up, is that I'm beginning a podcast, and I've probably announced the podcast to further people than I've actually announced this joint. But I'm doing that, and I'm putting together. I'm lining up some combos. So basically, the format of the podcast is just me talking with somebody else. It's not just me just doing these joints, but it's me actually having conversation with somebody else. Myriads of brethren, and on myriads of topics, mixed and otherwise. Aggregately, it is the Melange experience. Um, and so, with that, there's also crowdfunding campaigns and uh, publications and merchandise that is being organized around this as well, so that I can eat food and drink beverages and do other material things that are necessary in this life from this work. Um, so those are things that are in process at the moment, and those are some of the things I got to do. I talk about. And I also wanted to like give further information about that because I consider it a significant consideration in the context of this topic this afternoon about practicing the ethics. So again, it's one thing to talk about it; it's another thing to live it. And so I live it in a significant way for years at this point. But the consideration at this point is living it in an increasingly honest way. And that requires some explanation, but um, uh, that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about that whilst I talk about this. But guess what? This is done. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, zajen, adios, te chakaris, asimpe na asamubo, kile ufred, love and peace.